We are calling on everybody to think Africa, act Africa, and prosper Africa.
It comes down to the change of mindset.
We are implementing the Africa we want.
A lot of the countries understand that this is good for them, that it is a game changer.
This is an historic moment for our continent.
So this is entirely African driven. These African countries are making a treaty among themselves.
We've been brought up with so many borders. You know, we have our little countries, we have our little economies, our little sectors. We have so many things that divide us, and I think this is an opportunity to really push against those boundaries and to change them.
I think you need to be very, very focused in what you are doing. Once you believe in what you are doing, you see, you should not take your either business or job as something that you must do. Okay?
Awesome. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us again on our third week of celebrating African History Month. I am Jerusalem, your host today. Our conversation, we have a very rich and very exciting topic, panel discussion, keynote speakers. So I'm excited to be here this morning with everyone. And I'm excited, and I want to thank our sponsor, United States of Africa, and the Council of Ethiopian Diaspora. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first guest speaker, and that's Dr. Awata, or Dr. Kevin Washington. He is a PhD in African-centered psychologist, licensed in Florida, Washington, D.C. He has taught and lectured in several colleges and universities nationally and internationally. NBC Universal, BEN National Alliance of End Homelessness, Ronald Martin, Nick Collins, Boris Harrison Foundation, Essence, and many other national and international organizations have sought his experience on Black psychology matter and leadership development. He is past president of Association of Black Psychologists and is currently an associate professor and head of the sociology and psychology at Grambling State University Black Marriage Day. Awesome. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Awata.
Hey, thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm actually looking forward more to a discussion about this as opposed to a presentation. I just want to advocate this idea of Pan-Africanism and looking at W.B. Du Bois, who is credited with being the father of Pan-Africanism, and his idea about the interdependency that we have among African people to be connected. I think it must be honored. I also understand the Kwame Nkrumah, Nana Kwame Nkrumah's concept of Pan-Africanism and why it was important for the liberation of African people. I think often we get caught into the idea of the independence of the various countries of Africa. However, he and Patrice Lumumba were very clear that if there was not a unified Africa, there was not a joining together of people of African descent globally, then there would not be any level of freedom and or peace for the continent. And we see that is true today, that even though one may have the trappings of what it appears to be freedom, when one controls your economic wherewithal, when one controls where you come and go, controls your airspace, control your water space, then they are perpetually in control of your livelihood. And so Pan-Africanism was very critical and remains critical to the survival thrust of people of African descent, because the coming together, the understanding that we are a unified people, no matter where we find ourselves in the Caribbean, we find ourselves in Brazil, in the US, we are still one African people, that people from the continent were taken, and there was no concern about specifically where one came from. There was more concern about the wealth of Europe. So I will pause there so we have a greater discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited, for this conversation. So next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Amazata Bukari Abira. He is a historian who wrote African Countries, Mali, Nigeria, an anti-imperialist leader, Kwame Nkrumah, Walter Randi. He is an author of two classics in French, African Unite, or on Pan-Africanism. I'm not going to try to read that French translation of it. Political activist. He's a president of the Pan-Africanism League as well. So I'm going to welcome Dr. Amazata.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I think it is really important that we had this discussion about Pan-Africanism. As a scholar and an activist, I think we need to understand the difference between theoretical Pan-Africanism and practical Pan-Africanism. We also have to speak of the clash between the so-called French and English-speaking Pan-Africanism, and also the connection between African diaspora and what is really currently happening in Africa. So we have lots of things to speak on this afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you on, and you bring a really good wealth of knowledge with your book and everything. So I'm excited to hear your perspective. Awesome. So next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Sige. She is a Pan-African scholar born in Paris, France, of Jamaican and Nigerian parents. She was educated in the United States at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. And she's also studied at the University of Aleppo, a university under the guidance of Nobel Prize winner Loretta Professor Wali. I'm going to have her correct my pronunciation on that. And finally at Howard University, where she was awarded the Doctor of Ministry for her studies on Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church after studying with the support of the late Patriarch, His Holiness Abuna Paulos, and with permission of the present of Patriarch, His Holiness Abuna Matthias. She continues to pursue access to primary source material in Africa history through her current PhD studies in the Department of Semitic and Egyptian Language and Literature of the Catholic University of America, where she is the first woman of African descent to be admitted in the history of institution. Dr. Sige has dedicated her life to illuminating the contribution of Africa and African descendant to a global history and culture. So welcome, Dr. Sige.
Hi. First of all, I am the CEO and founder of the African Historical Society. And please, follow our work. I am the first African American or African descended woman to get a graduate degree in Semitic and Egyptian languages and literatures. My specialties are classical Ethiopic and Egyptian. I also read Old Nubian. I'm presently doing PhD in Old Nubian. I did my doctorate in studying African knowledge systems, which I have always, been of the position that African knowledge systems, the source, the sort of guardians of African knowledge systems have been African priesthoods since ancient times. So for that reason, when I was at University of Ile-Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, under the guidance of Nobel Prize laureate Professor Oluwole Soyinka, I studied the Ifa priesthoods of Western Africa, studied their divination system with the Babalawos, and I went on to study with the Ethiopian priesthoods, because the Ethiopian Orthodox priesthoods are also, since ancient times, guardians of African knowledge systems, and also a lot of Africa's primary source material on African history. So with them, I began to learn Ge'ez and finally secured a graduate degree in classical Ethiopic and Egyptian. Pan-Africanism. I think that in order for us to be effective in our understanding and our practical execution of Pan-Africanism, it's very important that we understand what it is a response to, right? To be strategic. Now, I myself am a Pan-African person, as Yeru shared with you. My father is a professor of mathematics from Jamaica. My mother is a professor of English literature from Nigeria, and I was born in France and grew up in the United States. So I'm a product of Pan-Africanism, right? And we need to understand that Pan-Africanism was began as a revolutionary response, a response to a strategic and systematic attack on Africa and the Africa descended. This is very important for us to understand here. And this attack on Africa and the African descended, as I hope we'll get a chance to talk to, had socio-political aspects, economic aspects, philosophical aspect, religious aspects, because, in the 15th century, what they call the Age of Discovery, what we at the African Historical Society call the Age of Conquest, was a period in the 15th century where Europe came out upon the world and there was a declaration of war on Africa. And this declaration of war consisted in the Pope Alexander VI robbing all people of Africa of humanity by saying we did not have souls and we did not have the quote unquote right to discovery. So Pan-Africanism, which was a reaction of Caribbean and African American oppressed people in the diaspora, to say we need to unify to have an effective attack, is many-pronged. One, it has to do with us reclaiming our humanity de facto, which was first taken as early as the 15th century, and then we see it again in the rise of the transatlantic slave trade. It occurred also with the Arab conquest of Egypt. The robbing of our humanity, there is an ethical, philosophical part. And this was all to get control of our wealth. So another prong of Pan-Africanism has to be, how do we wrest control of our wealth and control our wealth? So, and then finally, there's the socio-political aspects. And these are the sorts of foci that we have at the African Historical Societies. First of all, looking at the history of the attack that was made on African and African descended people so that we can then devise an effective reaction to it to restore. Finally, let me just quickly say that colonization and slavery, one of the first aspects is to delegitimize all of the institutions of the people who are being defeated. So I hope we'll get a chance to look at how we can restore our institutions. Thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to introduce, I felt like we're going into the discussion without having all our panelists. So I feel the passion. So I'm excited for our conversation coming up. And so next, I'm going to introduce Harmela Aregawi. Harmela is an Ethiopian American journalist. She's worked for CBS, Al Jazeera, America, and Current TV. Amongst others, she became an independent journalist last fall after being appealed by the propagandizing way of mainstream media was and is covering the conflict in Ethiopia. Harmila is one of the founder of the No More movement, a pro-Africa anti-imperialist movement that was created to push back against and correct false stereotypes narrative about Africa and the largest global South. You can find some information at Harmila's work on YouTube at Harmila TV, and then hit subscribe and share with friends as well. So thank you, Harmila, and welcome to the stage.
Hi, Yaruz. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Let's see. I'm going to try to pronounce this name as much as I could. Obunki Abadella is a world-renowned master linguistic scholar and an architect at the oldest and largest Black social education network on the planet. He completed his PhD in linguistics at University of Ghana in 2012, winning the prestigious Vice Charles Award of the Best PhD Thesis in Humanities. He's also won the 2016 Providence Publication Award for the Best Article in the College of Humanity. In 2019, he was the recipient of the Nana Marcus Moisey Garvey Foundation Award for Excellence in African Studies and Education. He was awarded in 2021 and 2022, University of Lagos and Lagos area Center Fellowship, where he contributed significantly to the work of reconfiguring African study. He's a senior research fellow and head of language, literature, and drama section of the Institution of Africa Studies at the University of Ghana. And he is editor-in-chief of the Ghana Journalist Linguistic. He served as the secretary of African Studies Association of Africa from 2015 to 2020. He also plays an instrumental role in the 34th Africana of diaspora receiving Ghanaian citizens in 2016 and 126 receiving citizenship in 2019. He now assists other interests in Ghana. Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna bring him up to the stage. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
So I definitely appreciate the introduction and then also the invite to this panel. Here are some people just touching on some of the topics. For me, in terms of my contribution to the discussion, I won't go into my discussion, but we'll discuss a couple of quick points. One, I want to go into the significance of names for Black people throughout the world, especially in terms of how it's understood that our names have an impact and an influence in how we understand our destiny. So I want us to talk a little bit about the etymology of the term Africa and also the etymology of terms in our own indigenous languages for the continent now known as Africa. And basically the import is that the meaning of the name that we choose for ourselves has an impact on who our constituency is and who our constituency is not when it comes to Pan-Africanism. And in terms of that, I want us to also look briefly at the 1900 Conference on Pan-Africanism, where the term was coined and invented, and how the term Pan-Africanism was always linked to Black people. They use the term African, Black, and Negro interchangeably. And I want us to, deal with a little bit of the history of even the term Pan-Africanism if we're going to understand it correctly. I also want to deal a little bit in terms of the implications in terms of who the land belongs to based on the name that we have for ourselves. Also in the context of the original meaning of Pan-Africanism that I would argue has been hijacked by those who mean continentalism to the detriment of Black people who happen to not be on the continent. So, I won't, like I said, I won't go into my full discussion, but, definitely I would like to situate a lot of this discussion around the history of Pan-Africanism as a term, the hijacking of Pan-Africanism as a term, and then the implications, for example, with Haiti being rejected from the AU, even though it's probably one of the blackest nations on earth. And in the same year, 2016, Morocco being accepted into the AU, even though in Morocco, the word black man means slave and slave means black man, that's Abid. So I think that there are plenty of discussion points that we can discuss in order to move the work forward.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to introduce our last speaker and then we'll go into our discussion. So Miss France Safarina, she was born and lives in Namibia. She is a language and researcher enthusiast. She holds a Bachelor's of Education and Honors degree from University of Namibia. Additionally, she holds a Bachelor of English honors degree from Namibia University of Society and Technology. She is also completing a Master's of English and Applied Linguistic degree from Namibia University of Science and Technology. Awesome. Welcome.
First of all, I would like to say thanks for having me. So I would just like to shortly say that Pan-Africanism being a worldwide movement aimed at encouraging and strengthening bonds between African communities. So I would really say that commenting on the importance of indigenous languages let me say in Africa is really a very important topic to link to the movement of Pan-Africanism. So briefly, I just want to say that today I would like to talk about some important things on indigenous languages. So I will comment on the matter of language endangerment, having seen how many languages have gone extinct. So I find it really interesting to touch on that issue. So I will also comment on the value of having your or valuing your own language. I will as well look at the impact of losing your own language. Because language really is a very big tool in defining you, retaining your identity, and all that. So I would also like to comment on the digital language divide that I've observed today, and probably some other researchers of language might also agree with me that there's really a big digital language divide or gap. So these are some of the things that I would just like to comment on in today's discussion. I will also give a few recommendations on what should really be done so that we will revitalize or preserve our indigenous languages, especially in the African setting. So once again, I say thank you for having me in this discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I know we tried to dive in a little bit. So this first question would be, what's Pan-Africanism? Who are your favorite catalysts in the Pan-Africanism movement, which Dr. Sege touched a little bit on? And then how do we revive the spirit of Pan-Africanism? So it's kind of a mouthful, but if we want to go ahead and start with Dr. Amazata, and then we'll go into Dr. Sege, and then Harmela. So please go ahead, Dr. Amazata.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. My father was born in West Africa, was born in Benin. My mother was born in French Caribbean, in Martinique. So indeed, we are billions of people's products of Pan-Africanism. I think it is a global history of resistance, of struggle, of solidarity, of Black solidarity. And it started with the Haitian Revolution. I think we must be clear that Pan-Africanism started in Haiti in 1804, when for the first time some Africans took their freedom out of Africa. I think we need to keep it in mind that Pan-Africanism is the global sum of Black experiences out of Africa. And this is really important because it means that we have one African continent, one united Africa, and we have also global African diaspora. And the struggle of this global African diaspora are interconnected with the African situation. And both are suffering and experiencing colonialism, racism, slavery, domination, oppression, and so on. And those struggles have been disconnected. They have been disconnected by imperialism, by neocolonialism, and also by the local African and Caribbean and Black lackeys of global domination. So Pan-Africanism is a system of resistance, a political, cultural, and economic system of resistance. And this system raises the question of peoples and states. Is it a people-centered movement, or is it a state-centered movement? Is it about the African Union as a combination of more than 50 African countries, or about the global African experience? And this is something really important, because when we look at the story of the Pan-African movement in the 20th century, we have this sort of opposition between what has been done out of Africa by the African diaspora in the Pan-African Congress with the Garveyist movement and so on, and what is expected by Africans at home. And so I think that one of the main issue is to find a definition that engulfs both Africans at home and abroad, and that deals also with the specific colored issue, because being Black is not the same where you're living in Africa or out of Africa, but inside Africa, like someone told it about Morocco and North Africa, we are also experiencing black racism, anti-Black racism. So Pan-Africanism must be an anti-racist, an anti-Black racist movement. It has to be anti-capitalist, but also it has to deal with how do we build, how do we take control of our own wealth, how do we recover our own identity, our own historical legacy, and how do we build a global project for the global Africa people. So when we speak of identity, we are speaking of history. So one very important point that I consider as a point of sovereignty is the restoration of African history. African history, and especially Pan-Africanism, must be taught in African schools today, and also in African diaspora schools. It is really important because there is no real teaching of Pan-Africanism inside Africa. It is also a tool against intra-Africa xenophobia, because we were taught to hate one another, and Pan-Africanism must propose a vision of Black love, of Black confidence, of Black self-trust that is really important. Thirdly, it must be a geopolitical vision of our position in this world. We are in war times. We are in a very difficult times where everywhere we go, African people, Black people are really despised. So Pan-Africanism must be the shield of African and Black people wherever they go. Another point I think that is really important is that we need to get some figures and some specific struggle of Pan-African history. The anti-apartheid movement is one of those Pan-African victories. The Battle of Adwa, the resistance of the Ethiopian people against colonialism, is another example. We also need to promote some key figures of this movement. We speak of Du Bois, we speak of Puma. I think that in my specific case, is probably the works of Walter Rodney from Guyana, who inspired me mostly about what we should do in the next years about the struggle for Pan-Africanism. That is to say, we have to define our own situation wherever we live in this world, to analyze it and to show it to the global Black world, so as to find a common answer to our difficulties wherever we are today. The situation of Black people in the US is not the same as Black people in the Caribbean, is not the same as people in Africa. But we need to use Pan-Africanism as a platform to find a common solution that should implement foreign affairs and international relations so as to change the balance of power, of global power today. This is really important. So I think that Walter Rodney could be one of the most inspiring example. I also think of someone like Julius Nyerere, the first president of Tanzania. When we are speaking of economic Pan-Africanism, we could speak of Ujamaa. That is a kind of African socialism, but it is not really socialism, but we have to think about how do we produce an economic system that is safeguarding our own values, and in the same time that has a modern position in this global world. So how do we deal, how do we fight capitalism, either with capitalist weapons or with anti-capitalist weapons? And the answer is in the story of Pan-Africanism. A last point about this first time of speaking is that we also have to fulfill the gap between popular Pan-Africanism and institutional Pan-Africanism. What we see today in the African Union is not Pan-Africanism, because in any African countries you could find a Pan-Africanist leader. So Pan-Africanism is not at the head of African states. It must be re-implemented on the political scale, and it also had to be revived in the vision of global issue. One is reparation for slavery and colonialism, and the issue of reparation is large. It is not the same as in Africa, like in the Caribbean or in the US. Also, the thematic of the African Renaissance, that is really important, that deals with cultural African endogenous tradition and knowledge. So I think that these points could give a first definition of what we see as Pan-Africanism and how do we use it in our daily commitment, and also why it is really important that we have this discussion. I'm coming with my own path, with my own trajectory. I'm leading a global Pan-Africanist organization that is mainly based in so-called French-speaking countries. And this kind of discussion is really important. And I really hope that each one of us will give his own vision, and that we could connect beyond this discussion to revive concretely Pan-Africanism. So this is the first words that we would like to give, and thank you.
Okay, awesome. Dr. Zake?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Oh, no, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Your mic is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I wanted to sort of link what I was saying to what Mr. Yabara said. I wanted to just quickly say that we need to study more about how our movements are in fact interrelated and have been interrelated historically. We need to have a better understanding. And again, the reason that there is an interconnectedness de facto between our movements on a global scale for the African and the African descended is again because the conquest of Africa was systematic. Again, it began in the 15th century very systematically with dehumanizing all of us. And then moved into the colonial period with the delegitimization of our institutions, the delegitimization of our knowledge system. So as Mr. Yabara was saying, we need to look at how we can have the courage to develop paradigms that come out of our own endogenous knowledge systems and institutions. In 1999, long time ago, I spearheaded the All Africa Conference of African Principles of Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation, because at that time, what I was saying is that, look, all over Africa, we have endogenous court systems. In fact, most Africans prefer to settle their disputes in their endogenous court systems. Atsi Haile Selassie made it part of the constitution in Ethiopia that people could use their so-called shmagele, or elders councils, to be able to resolve conflict. So we need to, for example, have the courage to go into our existing endogenous court systems in order to extract from them their core principles of restorative justice, for example, in order to address modern problems. Similarly, we are the most ancient empire builders on earth. We have the oldest state and political systems on earth. We need to look at those principles of how we ruled. Again, in Ethiopia, they had very republic-oriented Gada systems. Amongst the Yoruba in Ijebu, we had city-state systems where, you know, you had representative government and so on. We need to have the courage to look into these institutions and extract from them principles that we can use to address modern problems. Again, one of the first things that happens when a people is conquered and vanquished is that all of their institutions are delegitimized. Their institutions of government, their institutions of religion, their institutions of communication, that is their languages, all of those things are attacked and deconstructed so that the ruler, the new government, can be established in place of the old. So what Pan-Africanism, in my view, needs to be about is about going back within our cultures and taking out, because, you know, taking out the core principles and developing them. We need to disavow ourselves also of the idea that Africa is static. African culture is not static. African culture is evolutionary, just like every other culture, just like every other form. So we need to have the courage to develop the core principles that we have found useful in our institutions to solve our problems. I want to very quickly talk about, for example, the interconnectedness of, you know, we gave it the name Pan-Africanism, but I'm suggesting that Pan-Africanism existed before we gave it a name. And it grew de facto out of a reality of African peoples and African descended peoples reclaiming their agency, reclaiming their humanity, reclaiming the control of the wealth that their own labor produces, right? So I don't want to limit it to anti-capitalist or anti-socialist. I think that communism is in a lot of ways just as problematic as capitalism in that it is completely materialistic. We as Africans are not just, we don't organize our societies. We have not organized our societies simply in terms of defining the human being as a producer, right? Both capitalism and communism define the human being essentially as a producer, as a cog in an industrial mechanism. We need to have the courage to look within our own forms of organizing economics, organizing society, to be able to reclaim our African identity and to transform ourselves. I prefer the word transformation to revolution. Let us take the good things from our experience and transform them with courage, guided by African paradigms. You know, no one talks about that in the court of Menelik, there was a Haitian, Sylvain, Benito Sylvain, who was a Haitian who was in the court of Menelik. And so there was a connectedness between the Haitian revolt against slavery and the victory of Adwa. Similarly, there's a relationship again between Adwa and other movements that happened in the United States and in the Caribbean that were inspired. And those movements again affected other movements in Africa. When Atsi Haile Selassie, when Emperor Haile Selassie came to visit the United States and visit the Caribbean, he also influenced the African Americans and Caribbean people who were fighting for their rights. Similarly, the anti-apartheid movement, all of us fought against against apartheid everywhere. So there is a de facto interconnectedness between our revolutions that we need, between the reclaiming of our agency, the reclaiming of our humanity, the reclaiming of the control of the wealth that our labor produces. So, you know, for me, those are the primary issues that we look at in his African Historical Society. And we want to look at the decolonization of the mind. Again, you know, one of the things that I learned from the academy, that I call for the decolonization of the academy and the decolonization of our minds. And, you know, again, I go back so often to the Ethiopian priesthood just because I learned so much knowledge from them. And one of the things that they say is that every single action begins as a thought. So in order to be able to act in terms and build the Africa that we want to see, we have to order our minds. We need to liberate our minds from the colonialist, racist categories that define how we look at ourselves. Concepts like North Africa and Black Africa and East Africa and West Africa are anathema to me. I cannot stand them. And there are people in Northern Africa. I refer to Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, Western Africa, Southern Africa. But I want to throw away all those categories of how we look at each other, because the Berber people, for example, of Northern Africa have been fighting against genocide against the Arab invaders. And the only, you know, there are peoples, there are indigenous African peoples in Northern Africa who continue to fight against genocide. And when we say things like North Africa and Arab Africa, we are supporting the genocide against the Berber people and the other African indigents of Northern Africa who continue to fight for their right to speak and write their language, Berber, and other languages of Northern Africa, of people who are not all Arab looking, who continue to fight for their rights in Northern Africa. Similarly, with East Africa, West Africa, that denies the Sahelian relationships that go straight across from Ethiopia to Nigeria, which we see with the Nilo-Saharan linguistic group, right? We have people straight across speaking languages in the same family from Eritrea to Nigeria, and you will see the Fulanis look exactly like the Tigrians and Northern Amharas, and there is this interconnectedness of the cultures and the histories of all of the Sahelian people. So we need to disavow ourselves of the borders that have been put in our minds. All of these African borders were put in place during the Berlin Conference and afterwards with the specific purpose of, in 1884 to 1885, when they had the Berlin Conference where they divided up Africa, the borders that were drawn in Africa.
So hold on, because what you're hitting on right now is something that is very much akin to what Dr. Obadale talks about. I know that we had Hermana coming up. I'm going to come next, but I think that it would be a nice segue, Akunini, if you could actually extend this conversation and make sure that everybody can get a chance to talk. Would you extend something that you're speaking about the idea you mentioned about the language, how we move with language, languaging, the shifting of the construct, moving from Africa and where it came from, the Black, but also talk about this issue of languaging and control of a population. Go ahead, Dr. Badale, please.
Okay, and I had to cut you on that point. I do want to contribute. I don't know if you just wanted to land on that last sentence.
Yeah, I just wanted, I probably got to cut it, but I just want you to just now extend it to your conversation, Baba.
Okay, no problem. Can I share my screen? I know it's not like a full presentation, but there are a couple of slides that I think would buttress what I have to say on a specific topic, if that's all right.
Yes.
I think I want to be mindful of time, just because I think we almost we have 10 minutes on the clock, and I want to kind of give everyone the chance to be able to have the opportunity to speak. So I don't know if you want to just highlight a few things, maybe And then we'll
Yeah,
give everybody else the opportunity to speak at least once. And then if we have time, we can take a look at that as well.
okay, no problem. So I'll be, very brief as far as this goes, but just in terms of the points in terms of language. So when we look at the language, first off, when we deal with Pan-Africanism, the null hypothesis is that something that started in the late, 19th century. Some would even say 18th century, so forth and so on. But a lot of my work actually goes into classical origins of Pan-Africanism. And I'm not the first one to make that point. So like Nana Walter Rodney, for example, would say that the first, and this is what he did say, the first area where Pan-Africanism arose was in the Americas, in the Caribbean. But a lot of what I deal with is that first, when we look at Pan-Africanism, you have people like, for example, Attaining, who says that if Pan-Africanism is the idea of Africans coming together, then you could look at classical, what they refer to as Egypt, but their correct term is Kemet. The very fact that we call that land Kemet, which means land of Black people, lets you know something about us willing to come together on the basis of who we are and whose we are. A similar point was made by Obinfo Kwame Nantambu, who deals with, again, Kemet. Now, beyond just the term, Kemet, we find that when we look into our own languages, that this is a concept that comes up time and again, that we're Black people. So when you look at Akan, you have Obibini, and the BB translates to Black, and the plural is of BB4. If you look at Yoruba, Adulawa, which again translates to Black people, and Ile Adulawa is the way that we say Africa. If you look at Bambara, Farafina, and Farafin, again referring to Black people. If you look at Wolof, Nut Kunyo. If you look at Kikongo, you have Ndombe. And then again, if you look back to classical Medu-Neter, you find again that we refer to ourselves as Kemetiu. Now, what's significant about that is that that's very similar to Nana Henry Sylvester Williams, that he contacted Black people, and in the address to the nations of the world by the Pan-African Conference, they were always using Negro and Black subjects. They only spoke of Abyssinia, Liberia, Haiti, and then those other Black states that would emerge. And then also they talk about the Black colonies of Africa and the West Indies. They talk about a great central Negro state that's measured in its happiness and true advancement of its Black people. So the people who invented the word Pan-Africanism were specifically talking about Black people. However, those who have hijacked the term and what I refer to as aggressive ideological mimicry, they're very beholden to take the term but not take the content, because they'll say Pan-Africanism, but then they're including, invaders to what appropriately in our own languages, if we're really serious about using our languages, would be referred to as the land of Black people. Even Ethiopia, the Greeks were clear that this is a land of the burnt-faced people. Even the Arabs are clear when they say Bilad Sudan, that they're talking about the land of Black people. So I wanted to introduce this point that if we're actually talking about conceiving of this in our own languages, then that's what we're going to deal with. Another point that I just briefly also want to touch on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, is a point that was just mentioned. If you look at case studies, capitalism, socialism, communism, in all of those countries, it's white capitalists on top, Black capitalists on the bottom. It's white socialists on top. If you look at Cuba, Black socialists on the bottom. If you look at communism, you could look at communism that started in 1908 in Ukraine, but you still have white refugees on top, Black refugees on the bottom. So this is something that's very problematic, that if it's a Christian country, it's white Christians on top, Black Christians on the bottom. And this is a point made by Nana Khaled Abdul Muhammad. And then finally, my point on this is in terms of decolonization. When we talk about decolonization, it's problematic for two reasons. One is that it views time as a line that centers our existence on the presence or absence of so-called white people. So we say that, all right, all of this is pre-colonial for the last 13.6 billion years. That's all pre-colonial. Then when so-called white people set their foot on the soil, now we're in colonization, and then it's post-colonial. But what happens is it really makes our entire existence just relative to their presence or lack thereof. It's problematic because of that. And then also it's problematic in terms of it viewing time as a line. Instead of us seeing that this aggression of Eurasians didn't start in the 15th century, that you can go back to the aggression of the Hyksos, the Hekau Chasut, in classical Kemet. You can look at the Assyrians, you could look at the Persians, you could look at the Greeks, the Romans, you could look at the Arabs, you can look at all of these streams of non-Black people coming into Kemet, the land of Black people. And, I think that if we're going to actually have a conversation on Pan-Africanism, we need to broaden our historical depth in order to see the classical coming together of Black people on the basis of being Black and self-defining as such, and the efforts that we made in classical times to drive them out, to build walls, in the first war of Black liberation, to drive out the Hyksos and so forth and so on. So I don't want to hog the microphone, but I did want to make a couple of points. So hopefully that's useful.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that is very nice. Well said. Harmila, I know kind of been listening to everybody, so I want to give you the opportunity. One, what's Pan-Africanism, who you're a catalyst, or anything that you want to highlight?
Sure, yeah. I think I would define Pan-Africanism as the recognition that when official slavery in the West, or when official colonialism on the African continent went away, the forces of colonialism and imperialism did not go away. And the second part of that is solidarity among the people that are targeted by those two forces. Now, there's a couple of ways that the people are subjugated. One is through brute violence, right? We see it in terms of actual intervention and wars, even now. And then I think the modern day way is false narratives. I mean, I worked in media for a long time. This is really what I'm passionate about. The tools of division remain, and they actually spread fire even faster now with social media and globalization of communication. The tools of divisions remain the same in terms of it being ethnicity and race and nationality and skin color and complexion. And, I think it's also the recognition that many of us are essentially displaced. We are not where our original ancestors were for different reasons, whether it's because of slavery or being refugees from wars often started by colonial and imperialist powers in our native countries, or immigration for economic opportunities, sometimes because the opportunities aren't there because of wars and some of the same forces. And so I think what's powerful about Pan-Africanism is being able to actually connect that our struggles are the same. I mean, one sort of simple connection is the struggle of African Americans in the US and the struggle of Africans on the actual African continent. And we talked a lot about, some of my panelists talked a lot about connecting those struggles and how our issue is sometimes they're disconnected. When we first moved to this country, we moved to Mississippi first. And it was really interesting to see that there were African Americans in the US, and recent African immigrants were sort of pitted against each other in different ways. So a lot of the media in Africa would show African Americans as being these, violent, inherently violent people. And then a lot of the media here in the US would show Africans as being this inherently also violent and poor and destitute folks. So I remember having conversations just being really young, of young people, young Black people in the US telling me things about myself as an African that was just very stereotypical. And then some of the new immigrants, particularly the parents, as they're navigating this new land, also bringing over some of those stereotypical views of African Americans. And when you have something like that, it really gives power back to the colonists, back to the imperialists. But if you can connect those two struggles, then now you have a larger body of people pushing back against the forces. And I think that it's something that's a little bit easier to do now with globalization and media and social media. But it's also what makes Malcolm X and people like him so ahead of their time. They were able to see that connection much earlier on. And although the globalization element also does create challenges through mainstream media narratives that continue to pit us against each other, which is something that #NoMore, the movement, has been fighting against. When we came out and were fighting for Ethiopia, which has been under attack for the last year and a half, we didn't just say this was an Ethiopia story. What we came out and said is this is a part of a pattern. This is not just us. We see it done with other countries where military intervention and wars and proxy wars are used to subjugate the people or to punish governments that are more for the people. And then on the other side of that, you've got activists that are that say that they are for the people of Tigray and northern Ethiopia. And although what they're talking about in terms of some of the suffering is accurate, what makes, in my opinion, my parents are from Tigray. In my opinion, what makes the activism so off the mark is that it's looking to the very colonial and imperialist powers that put our country, Ethiopia, in the situation that it's in. It's looking to those forces to solve the problems. It's looking to Congress. It's looking to the United Nations, these the institutions that are inherently racist, although you may have good individuals and some good work done by them. So that's why you've got Ethiopians against Ethiopians, because the rest of Ethiopians, generally speaking, understand who caused the war, that it is a group within Ethiopia that is a partner of imperialists. And so while we should all really be coming together and fighting that, we're of course fighting each other. And what are we talking about? Ethnicity. I mean, in 2022, we're talking about ethnicity. So those forces are still very much powerful. And for a lot of people, it's very difficult to connect the dots because they look at mainstream media as being legitimate. I think Dr. Sige talked about the delegitimization of our institutions. I mean, it is mainstream media here in the US that continue to tell us the story about Ethiopia. But if you have Ethiopian media stations that are telling you what's going on in Ethiopia, that's not legitimate. They don't know what they're talking about, even though they are the ones that are actually experiencing what's going on and that are in that country of over 110 million people. And so I think it's just really trying to take a bigger picture of activism and advocacy as opposed to looking at our own narrow lens, because as long as we are fighting each other and as long as we think our story is just a special and unique story and it's different than what's going on in Venezuela or what's going on in a different part of Africa or what's going on right here in the United States, then we're thinner, we're not as powerful, and it just essentially is looking at oppressed people or pitting oppressed people against each other, and then the powers that be and the master just kind of gets off scot-free. So I think I know I went in a lot of different directions, but that's essentially what I was defining it as. I think Malcolm X is just one of the greatest of all time in that sense. And in terms of how do we revive it, that's what we're trying to do with #NoMore. I hope a lot of the panelists are new to me, and I really hope we can all connect after this, because I just think that the more we can connect, the more we can grow this movement, the more powerful that we will be.
So connect we will do. This is, I don't know if anybody really knows what we have here, but this is one of the most amazing panels that could ever be assembled on this topic. And what we need to do is continue this discourse, and we plan to do this in the Pan-African Leadership Conference. So we will invite each of you all to come in and further discuss this, because it's too rich. It's just simply just to gloss over. That is who we are as a people, and how do we then regain our minds, and how do we begin to move forward with language and linguistic expression. All these things are critical to the discourse. And I think that we need more time to really unpack it and to go forward with it. Serafina, you are here, and what we're going to do quickly is that we just kind of do a quick close out on this, because the time is up for this, but it's not over. We will continue this conversation. I'm grabbing this moment because Nana Obadale is so difficult to catch up with. I have not seen him since the days long time ago in the Carolinas, and so I'm just honored to be able to see him at this time. But I just wanted to make sure that we have a chance to close out. So Serafina, give us a statement to think about, and then we'll go around back with just a quick statement about what to think about with this idea of Pan-Africanism and decolonization. Add you back
thanks
in.
for the chance. I'll try to make my discussion as brief as it could be. So, like I said before, I strongly believe that the movement of Pan-Africanism may not be really successful if the indigenous languages are fading out. So what I'm saying here is that it's really important to comment on the importance of indigenous languages, because I really think that they play a major role um, in bringing success to the movement of Pan-Africanism. So what I want to talk about here is that I have observed, and also research has indicated that there is really been a decline in there's really been a decline in the use of indigenous languages, like in Africa, for example. So some of the causes of these things include the fact that parents sometimes choose to talk to their children in the dominant languages, and this is what brings about the decline in the use of our own languages. But what I really say is that it is very important to magnify or to widen the use of indigenous languages, because there's some importance that I would attach on the use of indigenous languages. So the one of the key aspect of indigenous language is that the indigenous language promotes, using your own language promotes also your moral values. I mean that when people value their own languages, it means that even their values, morals remain strong. So if you might have observed today that there's a rise in crime activities, so I would really say that maybe if we try to put emphasis on the use of our own languages, maybe we might help promote moral values in the society. So, and another thing that I would say, that when you use your own language, you are defining yourself, and you have identity. So you know where you belong, and you know where you are coming from. So when you lose your language, you might lose focus, and it might become scary as to where this generation of today is headed to if we are leaving our own languages behind. So, and then the impact of these might be really scary, because what one might be wondering what will happen in the future. Remember, language was once used as a colonial tool by the colonizer. If we talk about Frantz Fanon, for example, he's one of the post-colonial thinkers. He comments on the issue of language, and places a huge importance on the use of language. So if we are not careful, we might lose our own languages, and then our own territory might be taken away from us, from those that are in power, by the dominant languages. So that this is really why I think we need to put focus into the use of our own languages. Another thing that I want to comment on is that one might have also seen that there's a digital language gap. What I mean here is that if you, for example, try to look at the literature that is available on the internet, for example, like if you look at the journal articles that have been published in today's literature, you will notice that very few attempts have been done to publish in African indigenous languages. And this is really something that interests me. And this is why I find it really important that we should put focus into it, and we should put effort into it, so we publish more in our own languages, so as to prevent them from going extinct or from disappearing. So you might also see that in today's schools, learners or students are writing proper English, for example, but they some of them could not use their own languages. So you really question, how is this person doing well in the second language but could not do well in the first language? But knowing your first language will help you to learn the second language. So it's important that more development be done in our own languages, if really we are to say that we have succeeded. Because I believe that anybody who learns a second language at the expense of his or her own language has not really yet won. So the recommendations that I would finally give here is that the native speakers of African languages need to develop, or they need to widen their own languages. And we need to do more writing in these indigenous languages. And I still see a need, for example, to consult our old age people. I mean, our elders, especially those ones that are in the villages or in the rural communities, because these people know a lot. They could develop the field of for example, African oral literature, because they know folk tales, they know these old stories from the past that carry our morals and values. So we really need to talk to these people before they leave this earth, because they have a rich information that they can share with us, and we can document it and preserve our culture and then broaden our identity.
Awesome.
So
Thank you so much.
thank you.
I know we're kind of, we just have time shortage today, but I think, like Dr. Mawata mentioned, we'd love to have you guys back. I know Dr. Zagay had actually prepared a presentation that we were going to go into a conclusion. I know Obadella also had a presentation he mentioned earlier. So what we can do maybe is have you guys on a separate conversation where we can have you present what you have prepared for us. And I think that's much needed. So we'll follow up with that with you guys and kind of have that conversation, as it is very important. I wanted to kind of give just like about a minute to everybody to kind of, if there's anything you missed, if there's an organization that you're involved in and the people that are tuning in, what you want them to follow so that they can learn more about what your contribution is to Pan-Africanism and to that movement. I'll give you that opportunity, and we're going to go into a quick break, and then we'll go into our next keynote speaker. So I do apologize, everybody, that we had a little bit of delay in start, and then we had just a wealth of knowledge here, and we need to spend a little more time with it. So with that being said, I'm going to go to Harmela first, and then Dr. Zagay, and then Dr. Mawata. Go ahead.
I have to take this minute to talk a little bit about the hashtag No More Movement. If the panelists are not aware of it, I would love to connect with you to talk about it. It started on a focus in Ethiopia, but it's very much Pan-African in everything that we're talking about. It feels like it's Pan-Africanism 2.0, the way that it's growing with people in Mali and Haiti and Venezuela, places that you feel like have nothing to do with you, but really do in terms of fighting the same forces. There's so much wealth of knowledge here. And I would be remiss to just not say, to make sure that all of us do connect. We do have, we are going to the streets in the next couple of weeks or so, and we would love you guys' involvement in that. And we would love to collaborate with you on some of the stuff that you're working on, because what good is it if we're all just kind of working in our own silos? And that's the beauty of this time, that we can connect via StreamYard, YouTube, or whatever is the case. And I'm on every platform at Hermela TV. It's very early on the West Coast. Hermela TV. And so if you guys follow me, reach out. I'm sure Yerus will also make sure that we can connect if we need to. But I really appreciate this conversation. And I think it was Dr. Washington that said there's so much here. So it feels like we've only kind of touch the surface, but that's just the nature of the topic. So thank you so much for having me. And it is an honor to be on the panel with all of you.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Zagay?
Yeah, I just wanted to, before I talk about the you've put it up, the African Historical Society. Thank you very much. We are very much focused on the decolonization of the academy and the we would like to see, we are focused on grooming a generation of African youth, self-consciously aware of their history from ancient times. As I mentioned again, I have a graduate degree in Egyptian and classical Ethiopic and read Old Nubian. So we want to go back to the original primary sources for our history, for the purposes of nation building, and we agree that language is extremely important. So we also teach contemporary languages. You can visit us at www.theahs.net. We are now proudly affiliated with Addis Ababa University, with the African Studies Institute at University of Ibadan in Nigeria, with University of Cape Town, with several HBCUs. Congressman Kwesi Mfume is a supporter. And so we are doing everything that we're doing on the IT basis. Our full IT platform will be launched in the next couple of months. We're finishing up the programming of it so that we can connect these institutions in our effort to decolonize the academy and decolonize the minds of Africans. I want to very quickly say it's very important that we are careful not to project the systems of racism into the ancient past. We have to be careful not to be guilty of modernism and to be completely inundated by the concepts of racism that we are fighting against in the modern era. Africa was not always in the same position that it is now. Africa was once a place of great empires that were spreading culture and civilization into the Middle East and the Mediterranean. And for that reason, who we are as a people was understood in a different way. So we need to not be bound as we're fighting against the mechanisms of racism, as Hermela talks about. We're globally resisting the same mechanisms that rob us of our agency and our wealth. There's a system that has been put in place. Let me just quickly say, global banking system, Standard & Poor's, the World Bank. There are global instruments that we are all fighting against, right? And this has been very, very systematic. And yet we have to be careful not to limit our identity and Pan-Africanism to racist concepts of what Blackness is understood to be today. We need to realize we are the products not of tribes, but of kingdoms, of empires. And so we need to have a bigger concept of who we are in order to move forward towards the Africa that we want to emerge.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Dr. Amazata, if you have any last minute thing you would like to say.
Yeah, I would like to thank you because as I'm an independent scholar and a political activist, and I'm trying to build, to bring together some African organization of the continent and the diaspora with an ideological base. And this is very important for me to exchange with brothers and sisters in the US or in the Caribbean. My organization, the Pan-African League Umoja, has several chapters in West Africa, in Central Africa, in Haiti, in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Canada. And we are trying to get in contact with US Pan-African organization and movement because we know that the US is a very important place for the Pan-African resistance and the Pan-African struggle, and we need to connect it with African peoples. We are also working with African youth. We have a newspaper that is Pan-African Magazine. We also have a website, so it's lp.umoja, the Swahili word, .org. And we need to engage on the political side of the struggle. So we need to get our people educated, politically speaking, like it used to be in the 70s and the 80s with Black Panthers movement and so on. And we also need to produce some organic intellectuals. I think it's really important, the notion of grassroots movements, organic intellectuals, and global solidarity. This is something very, very important if we want to speed up the fall of racism and neocolonialism. I was very glad to be part of this panel, and I really hope that we are going to work together to build a stronger African unity in the next days, weeks, and years. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And lastly, I think, Okonuni, please, if you have anything you would like to add.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. One thing that I would definitely like to let people know about is abibitumi.com. I looked with some dismay when I saw that we would be streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, which are all non-Black platforms, when we have our own Black social education networks, such as Abibitumi. So definitely the organizers, I want to extend a hand and let them know that, we also have streaming capabilities on Abibitumi. That translates to Black Power. And then also we have abibitumitv.com, and that's spelled ABIBITUMI.com, and then ABIBITUMITV.com. So definitely want to, if we're talking about decolonizing, one thing that we can do is decolonize the platforms that we're using, because ultimately what we're doing is we're building up the institutions of the same enemies that we are fighting against. And then also to the same point, to kind of buttress the point that was made by Month-AHM, just in terms of primary sources. As we were talking about completing the mission, that would be the original Pan-African mission of the very first people who called themselves Kemetiu, which means Black people. I want to point people to some primary sources, such as the autobiography of Winnie, the autobiography of Harkuf, Mary Carre, Nefertiti, Sanhat, Kamos, and many others. I know it's going to be recorded, so even as I'm mentioning them, people can read those primary texts. But what you'll find
in
is
what languages?
All of these are in Medu-Neter. This is actually from a forthcoming book called The Classical Kemetiu Origins of Pan-Africanism. And what you'll find is that the very first military document in the history of the world was about all the Black people coming together, the Kemetiu, to drive the Amu out of the land of Black people. And it mentions the Wawat Nahasiu, the Irjet Nahasiu, both the two sides of the house from Upper and Lower Kemet. So people deal with Pan-Africanism as though it's something that just started. But again, if you go back to the autobiography of Winnie, for example, that's around 4,300 years ago. What you'll find is the very first military document in history on the entire earth is about every kind of Black person coming together to drive out the Amu. If you look at the prophecy of Nefertiti, it's about building walls to prevent them from coming into Kemet, the land of Black people. So essentially, a lot of the work that I'm dealing with is about finishing the mission, that this isn't a new thing, even though we're all taught that, we just reacted to, the West or so forth and so on. But what we'll find is that this is actually our very first identity and our very first mission. And our job in terms of Pan-Africanism, if we understand it as the people who invented the word Pan-Africanism understood it, then we would ultimately finish that mission, which is around Black liberation. So that's what I have to say. And hopefully I'll see some of you at Abibitumi so that we can get off of these white platforms, stop building white institutions and stop building the white nation and start building the Black nation instead. Abibitumi.
Thank you so much. All right. Safari, any last minute you would like to add? Safarina, are you there? Okay. Maybe she's having a connection. So thank you so much for everyone that joined us today. Really appreciate you. I think as broad as this conversation may be, we had a really great conversation. Like Dr. Mawata mentioned, we definitely will have to have a different session and be able to really dissect and really spend some time from different perspective. And so thank you so much. Dr. Mawati, anything you would like to add? If not, we'll go ahead and introduce our next key speaker.
Just want to thank everybody for taking out the time to be a part of this conversation. It is very rich. The scholarship is profound. Deep work has been done. Great work has been done. And we need to be able to expand on this knowledge. This was equivalent to a prolific library that we could go and research. I mean, each person could present an entire day, if not a week, on what it means to be who we are, whether it is from the language, from a historical perspective, from the idea of identity. And so we want to make sure that we continue this conversation. And the conversation has to then move into action. And every one of you all are engaging in profound action. So a deep, sincere thank you for elevating African consciousness, liberating the African psyche, as Dr. Nobles reminds us to do, and to extend the genius of a great people. That we know that we are a seed of a seed of a seed of a seed of the seed, and that the genius that's within you has been there for generations. And now this is another form of the awakening of that particular genius. So thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. Look for communications to come from us very soon to continue this conversation very, very specifically, pointedly, so that we can begin to really gain much more of what you all have to offer and to share with the world. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, I will actually go just in a little bit of a short break with our promo video, and then we'll get back and introduce the next guest speaker, Professor Hannah.
We are calling on everybody to think Africa, act Africa, and prosper Africa.
It comes down to the change of mindset.
We are implementing the Africa we want.
A lot of the countries understand that this is good for them, that it is a game changer.
This is an historic moment for our continent.
So this is entirely African driven. These African countries are making a treaty among themselves.
We've been brought up with so many borders. You know, we have our little countries, we have our little economies, our little sectors. We have so many things that divide us, and I think this is an opportunity to really push against those boundaries and to change them.
I think you need to be very, very focused in what you are doing. Once you believe in what you are doing, you see, you should not take your either business or job as something that you must do. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next guest speaker, Professor Hannah Sadiq. She is founder and board director and team lead of Agile Education USA and the president of Bonishika. She is an academic and innovator and a pioneer in the usage of Agile teaching and learning methodology, Scrab and Scrab and higher education and professional training in the US. She is the first and the only academic in the world to have implemented Agile teaching and learning methodology, ATLM, Scrab, Scrab, and Kanban, sailing in classroom into more than 18 postgraduate and graduate and undergraduate courses by year 2020. Professor Hannah is the first and the only Bangladesh American registered Scrab trainer at Scrab Inc. Professor Sadiq is the first and the only Bangladesh American. And let's see. As the chairman, she organized the second Agile Education Global Virtual Conference on March 18 to March 20 in 2021, hosted by Agile Education in USA. A Nobel laureate Professor Mohammed Yunus was the chief guest speaker at the 21st Agile in Education Global Conference. Professor Sadiq is the co-creator and former director of Boston University Agile in Education and former executive board member at Boston University Agile Innovation Lab. She is conducting research in Agile in higher education, Scrab in higher education, and experimental team building and Scrab. Professor Sadiq is a graduate program developer. She is developed an Agile and project management MBA concentration program that reputes the university in the USA. And she was designed as several MBA courses, including project management, Agile and project management, project cost, risk and quality management, business marketing analyst, and project management information system. So thank you and welcome, Dr. Hannah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from this great event. I'm honored to be here. And so I just want to mention one thing before I share my stories with you is that this is a 20 minutes. It's not a presentation. It's certainly not a research presentation. It is I just want to share with you a few of my stories, what inspired me to do what I do as an academic, as an eternal student, and to share my learning with you, and to, if possible, to have a conversation with you of what we are doing at Agile in Education USA as a global network. Even though it's Agile in Education USA, we are a global professional network, mostly academics, researchers, innovators, pioneers from around the world. And very recently, we have launched our Africa chapter. So once again, thank you for having me here. So the theme, Pan-Africanism and Decolonization of Africa. I'm going to talk to you about an innovative teaching and learning method, as the host introduced, mentioned in the introduction, that I am a pioneer in the usage of Agile teaching and learning, Scrum in education, EduScrum, Kanban, Leaf, scaling in the classroom. And I also want to mention African excellence in innovative teaching and learning, but I will try to stay within the allocated time and share some research and findings in that regards. So as a purpose-oriented person, I want to first tell you why I'm here. And I also want you to think about why you are here. What do you want to learn? And so I am here. I am here to share my story with you so that you can decide whether to try Agile. It's an innovative teaching and learning method. It is also referred as a mindset. So for yourself. As I said, it is not a presentation, but I want to address a few questions, rather, right? And probably share my insights on those questions, on those points, important points regarding innovative teaching and learning. And so first and foremost, I want to talk to you about why Agile, Scrum, EduScrum, teaching and learning. Why not use the traditional teaching and learning? Why are we using the 19th century, the factory model education system that was formed during the Industrial Revolution to particularly meet the needs of that time period, and that was more than 100 years ago? Okay, so they literally took an industrialized approach to education. It is impersonal, inefficient, standardized. Okay, so fast forward to today, we are in 21st century. We are now living in a VUCA world where uncertainty is the only certainty. And so the then formed education system, 19th century factory model education system, is no longer relevant. So I also want to mention that education is a foundation of any nation, and it is the base for the development, progress, betterment of any society. So to me, in my opinion, Pan-Africanism, we've heard a great discussion, great panelists. It's been an honor and privilege. I've learned so much. So again, in my opinion, Pan-Africanism, decolonizing of Africa, will not happen until we dismantle the education system that was set forth by the colonizers. So I want to share a few quotes by a few scholars in the 19th century, referring to the education system at that time. As Malcolm X said, education is our passport to the future. for tomorrow belongs to the people who prepare for it today. And I also want to highlight a few parts from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., The Purpose of Education article. I know if you are in education, it's academics. I know you probably know this article by heart, but I'd like to mention a few of the parts of it anyway. So as he said, as I engage in the so-called bull sessions around and about the school, I too often find that most college men have a misconception of the purpose of education. Most of the brethren think that education should equip them with the proper instruments of exploitation so that they can forever trample over the masses. He also said that we are prone to let our mental life become invaded by legions of half-truths, prejudices, and propaganda. A great majority of the so-called educated people do not think logically and scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit, in many instances, do not give us objective and unbiased truth. So to save man from the masses of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. He also said that education must enable one to shift and weigh evidence to discern the truth from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. So the function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. And also education must also train one for quick, resolute, and effective thinking. So now I would like to speak to you a little bit about the teaching and learning method that I mentioned, Agile Teaching and Learning, Scrum. And I also want to talk to you about, can it address and solve those that were highlighted by the early scholars like Dr. King, Malcolm X? And can it help improve student engagement, student retention, areas we're struggling, not only in the USA, but throughout its global problem? So, EduScrum, while various tools and services can help students' success, EduScrum, an innovative teaching and learning method, has proven to be exceptionally effective way to increase student retention. And this is referring to a case study, and the case study proves that it is a proven method for teaching and learning and is known to effectively boost student motivation in higher education. And so briefly, I don't have a lot of time to go through the teaching and learning method and the framework, but what it is it is a truly student-centered learning environment. So here, students work in self-managing, self-organized teams and make their learning visible. Students take charge of their learning processes. They collaborate and they develop leadership skills. Faculty, on the other hand, become facilitators, effective guides on the side, not sage on the stage. And the school administration become more collaborative. And so the discussion I've heard before in the panel discussion, majority of the panelists were academics and researchers, could have been educators. So this is a question that I ask myself every time I stand in front of my students. Every class is different, every student is different, every student needs to be served according to their individual needs and capability. So what I ask myself this question is that, what are your strategies to engage your students in learning? And I ask that every time I stand before my students. So again, We are in 21st century, and 21st century education advocate for building 21st century skills, competencies, and so agile teaching and learning practices are aligned with 21st century education per se. So agile learning, it is a collaborative co-learning environment. It enables students, again, autonomy, experiential learning, knowledge-based learning, collaboration, so on and so forth. So where can you use it? Is it only in the classroom? No, you can actually use this framework, this method in teaching, in curriculum development, in project-based learning, project leadership, in service learning, in management, in parent interactions, students, name it. It has various a level of application. And so what we are currently focused on, and we also want to say that the future of agile teaching and learning and Scrum in higher education is that it can be utilized in faculty training and coaching. It can be utilized in professional development, and it can be utilized in program development. And so agile teaching and learning, again, focuses on demonstration and application, continuous improvement, adaptive and innovative solutions, problem solving, building strong community, leadership, student ownership, and agency. So I also want to highlight agile as it can be referred to, or it is referred to as a mindset. Okay, so the Agile Manifesto, we have a manifesto, Agile Teaching and Learning Manifestos. And so I want to highlight a few things from there also. So the Agile Manifesto says that, the Teaching and Learning Manifesto says that the attitude and learning skills are over aptitude and degree, employability and marketability over syllabus and marks, competence and collaboration over compliance and competition, faculty and students over administration and infrastructure. And so with that, I would like to pose another question to create the future of education, a global education system. How do we prepare our future generations so that they can take part in the complex world, the work environment, the society where uncertainty is the only certainty? So better problem solvers per se. So I want to highlight, as I mentioned before, two research work that was highlighted. The title of the paper, research paper, is Universities in Africa, Working on Excellence for Whom? Reflections on Teaching, Research, and Outreach Activities at African University. And this research is done by Dr. Jacques Zeeling. And the article discusses the current dynamics at African universities concerning the quality of teaching, the role of research, the level of community outreach, and the position of higher education in the educational sector as a whole. So one of their central conclusion was that the system of education in Africa in general, the higher education in particular, is highly dysfunctional, especially in terms of wasted human capacity as well as financial resources. And I also want to share a quote from that study, is that every day we can see the university buildings. We always wonder if this big institution with all its knowledge cannot help us, but we do not know how to ask, and we are afraid that they will send us away. I want to take you through another research work, and the title of this article is It Takes a Village, Attaining teaching excellence in a challenging context. And the focus of this article was a teaching and learning activity system, which it studied the purpose of understanding and resolving contradiction in the system. And so, well, it's a global, as I mentioned, it's a global issue. Globally, the academic profession faces many challenges, including pressure of mass higher education, fiscal constraints, new technologies, changing attitude towards accountability and management. So the current difficulties in this was a particular highlights in South Africa. So the current difficulties in South Africa, as it takes a village, finds that attaining excellence in challenging contexts of 162 education centers, such as how participation and throughput rates are partly due to historical legacies, current practices which continue to disadvantage some universities and others. So, as I mentioned before, is that this education system that was formed in the 19th century, it's a factory model education system, and it is no longer relevant to this day. And so that's what I'm going to end my story with you. And I'd like to see if anyone has any comments or would like to share anything, and or if you have any questions for me. I don't know if we had time left, but I will end my speech here. Thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you for having me. And yeah, so I'll take any questions or comments if you have. Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry. So I don't have any questions, but is there a link that we can share with the viewers maybe, or a website that you want to mention just so they can go and check out the resources that are available to them?
Sure, absolutely. You're welcome to join our network, and there's a free membership, and we have it's a very active network, so we have regular events. One coming up next week, actually on Thursday. So here we are, and then also I'll share our website. And would really like to connect with the academics and researchers and connect them with our African chapter that we have just launched. So we would like to explore the opportunities and focus on research and other work that we are involved with.
Awesome. All right. So I will go ahead and put that in the comment section. So please feel free to check out the website or the link to register for class. And we appreciate you again, Professor Hanna, for coming on and taking the time and speaking with us. And thank you so much for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you. Perfect. So now next we're going to have Dr. Siki, and she's actually going to do her presentation with us. So I'm very excited to be able to kind of sit back and listen and hear your presentation. So take it over. We can't hear you. I think you may be muted. No. No, I can't.
Can you hear me now? Okay, fantastic. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Well, I want to start by saying that, you know, this is normally a course that we give on the historiography of Africa. And so it's a long presentation. And so what I've decided to do with it to fit within the 10 minutes that we have today is to just sort of go look at some images and talk about the liberation of the mind that we at the African Historical Society believe is so essential to building the Africa that we want to see and to grooming a generation that has the right concepts in their mind, and most importantly are liberated of the concepts of conquest. As I've often said, the study of Africa up until now has been inextricable from her conquest. So the way we learn about ourselves is through the eyes of those who wish to conquer and exploit us through the institution of the academy. So I'm going to share the screen just to show you some initial images to allow you. Okay, let me know, Iero, if you can see the screen. Are you able to see my screen now?
No, not yet.
Can you see it now? I clicked on share screen. Okay, there we go. I think, are you able to see that now? Hello?
Yes, I do see it now.
Okay, fantastic. So why I say it's so important is, though, although as one of our speakers was talking about, people within Africa, ancient peoples did often refer to themselves as Black, though they also referred to themselves as red. That's very important to also note that we were also referring to ourselves as red peoples. And as any artist will let you know, the vast majority of us who are like my complexion, which is a brown color, in order to get that color, you'll use primarily red. And into that red, you'll mix some blue and yellow to get the various shades that most Africans have. So we also refer to ourselves as red peoples. That, again, is so important for us not to just limit ourselves to the categories that have been assigned to us by those who have vanquished us and conquered us, but to have a more complex understanding of who we are. Now, this map is very, very interesting, and I usually start this out to get people to realize that, for example, the fact that the North is now at the top is arbitrary. That is something that was a decision of 15th century European cartographers when Europeans started their age of discovery, which we rename as the age of European conquest. And when European cartographers started to draw maps of the world, they put the North at the top and they put Europe in the center. Now, prior to the 15th century, the South being up, the South up map was very common in the ancient world and represented the African worldview. So that even today, within the Ethiopian priesthoods and other priesthoods of Africa, the idea was that the Nile came from heaven. So in the maps that we look at today, where the North is at the top of the map, for us Ethiopian Africans, it's a bit strange because the Nile is flowing upwards, which is counterintuitive. And indeed, in ancient times, when Africans made their own maps, we put the South at the top, representing the idea of the Nile flowing down from heaven. And under the foot of the African kings was the Mediterranean. So here on the right, this is an ancient African map from what is referred to as Kemet, Egypt. It was also a Cushitic map. And you can see the Mediterranean at the bottom. You see the northern coast of Africa depicted there. And if we were to go up the map, you would see the southern tip of Africa at the very top of the map. So the idea that the North is up is one way in which the entire perspective of the world was changed through European conquest and the way in which we understand ourselves and how we're situated in the world. Another such map that I like to show people just to give people a chance to have an image of how things have changed is that up until the colonial era, the Atlantic Ocean was known as the Ethiopian Ocean. And the Indian Ocean was known as the Eritrean Sea. Let me see if I can share with you the map of the Eritrean Sea, which, out it's not showing here. But you all can look it up online, look up Eritrean Sea up until from the 5th century BC all the way up until the 19th century, the Indian Ocean, you know, the height of the colonial era, the Indian Ocean was known as the Eritrean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean was known as the Ethiopian Ocean. So that we can see that there are specific effects, deleterious effects vis-a-vis the position of Africa and Africans and African descended people in the world was diminished, particularly by the colonial era. First, again, in the 15th century, reaching another climax in the colonial era. Another map that I think is very useful for us to look at to understand how the position of Africa in the world and how our own understanding of who we are has so changed is, you know, I made this map up of showing you the medieval African trade routes. So one of the things that we need to sort of disavow ourselves of is also the idea that Africans have been just influenced by outside cultures, but our cultures and civilizations have not impacted the world, or that we were not traveling around the world taking knowledge of how to build, knowledge of medicine, knowledge of astronomy, knowledge of weaving, knowledge of metallurgy all over the world. And so this map, for example, shows medieval trade routes, and you'll see I put in this blue arrow going straight across the African Sahel. There is a relationship between all of these kingdoms that you see here on the right, from Eritrea all the way across into West Africa. People have been moving back and forth for millennia, carrying with them their languages, their cultures, their knowledge, intermarrying with each other, so that as we rebuild, we need to disavow ourselves of these borders that Europeans strategically put to divide up African empires, to divide up African trade routes in order to take control of our wealth. So interestingly, just a few months ago, I learned that Nigerian Fulanis turned up in Ethiopia. And I was talking to Ethiopians about this and saying, I'm not surprised at all, because people have been moving back and forth across the wetlands of Africa or the Sahel of Africa for millennia, such that we see Nigerians who look like this. These are all Nigerians. Now, what's so interesting about these Nigerian peoples, these Hausa Fulani Nigerian peoples, is they look exactly like Ethiopians, and yet they were not characterized as Hamitic or Semitic or considered to be from outside of Africa, because they came from kingdoms that were already vanquished. Ethiopia was a problem because Ethiopia was an African kingdom that was not vanquished, full of Africans who had control of their civilization and their culture. And so one had to explain them away. And so one says that they are not Africans, or their culture doesn't come from Africa. But as you can see, these are Nigerians, and you cannot distinguish them from any Ethiopians. Similarly, these Ethiopians cannot be distinguished from anyone in any other part of Africa. So I like to say, you know, we need to begin by liberating our minds of these false categories, these false racist categories that have been put into our minds. We need to look at, again, when we look at the study of Africa, one of the things that I noticed when I was doing my degree in Semitic and Egyptian languages and literatures was that there was a constant discussion of people's carrying civilization into Africa, whether it was so-called Semites or Europeans or Romans or Greeks, but there was no study practically no study or discussion of the flow of culture in the opposite direction. So we need to gain a deeper understanding of how Africa has contributed to global civilization and how our civilizations have impacted other civilizations around the world, in order to also have the courage to rebuild our civilization. So These are some pre-colonial perspectives on looking at African cultures and civilizations and identities. And we find that the African language groups follow these trails. So interestingly, we have the trans-Saharan cultures of Africa. Again, the Arab conquest of Africa is post 7th century. It comes to a head in the 7th century. And prior to that, you had other endogenous African peoples who inhabited Northern Africa and who survived there. In pockets, many of them have suffered rape and genocides, but they continue to fight for the right to speak their languages and to express their cultures. Inter-Sahelian culture from Eritrea all the way to West Africa. Because of the situation in Ethiopia today, I like to stress that the Ethiopian Academy was indeed colonized. The new history of Ethiopia that was given by Germany and England created a lot of the divisions that we now see in Ethiopia. So most Ethiopians have false ideas in their minds about a Semitic North, a so-called Semitic North, and a non-Semitic or Cushitic or Africoid South, right? And this comes out of ignoring the Cushitic peoples who are some of the most ancient inhabitants of northern Ethiopia, like the Kunama people, like the Agua people, like the Tigray people, like the Nara people, like the Nere people, all of these Cushitic groups who have been living in Aksum and Tigray and Eritrea as far back as we go. Similarly, in the south of Ethiopia, we have the Gurage, who are so-called Semites. We have several Omotic groups that have been reclassified as Semitic. So we need to be critical of all of these categories, the language categories, all sorts of ethnic categories. All of these things were instituted in order to facilitate the conquest of Africa and the degeneration of her civilizations, of her kingdoms, of her empires. Similarly, we have the Sudanic nexus of African civilizations and cultures. So you find some of the same languages spoken in Sudan and in Nigeria, like Gambara. Gambara is a language that's spoken in Sudan, and it's spoken straight across that whole green area that I have put there. And then, of course, the vertical line that I have there, that defines the Nilotic cultural nexus. One of the things that I've been pushing for very much in my field is to study Egypt or Kemet, Punt, Kush, that is Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, together to understand the interrelatedness of these civilizations. This has not been done because the aim of the vanquisher is to see to it that we remain divided and that we understand ourselves as in such a way that we do not identify with each other. So we push very much at the African Historical Society, ridding our minds of these categories that were put in place in order to divide us and in order to rule over us. Finally, because I know I'm running out of time, let me just show you this slide, which I made up to show just some of the ancient African scripts. I had to make this slide because you never see them together. And I believe that this is by design. These are the most ancient forms of writing in the world. The conquest of Africa has always been connected with the plundering of our libraries. One of the things that I always ask is, if civilization came from the Middle East and from the Mediterranean, why is it that they are always coming to Africa to plunder our libraries? From 48 BC until today, through Timbuktu, which was a medieval height at one time. 25,000 students studied in Timbuktu, Mali each year. People came from as far away as Mecca to study in Timbuktu. So if civilization came from the Middle East and from the Mediterranean, why is it that I cannot find a single solitary African king who ever even contemplated plundering a Greek library or a Roman library? Why did no one go to Mecca looking for knowledge from Africa until after the conquest of the Africa and the destruction of African knowledge centers and the delegitimization of our institutions? So first here we have the hieroglyph, which everybody knows is the temple script. Next to it, however, we have Demotic, which very few people get to learn or even see. And Demotic was the everyday script of ancient Kemet, of ancient Egypt. That was the everyday writing that everybody used. Next to the Demotic, we have Meroitic. Meroitic was the written language of ancient Sudan. Next to this, we have Ge'ez, or what they like to call classical Ethiopic. However, that's problematic because it's very much in use. So it's not just classical, right? So again, that is an imposition of European historical categories on our history. Next to the Ethiopic or Ge'ez, you have Berber. Berber script, which Arabs made illegal for the Berber people to write in and to speak, as the Berber people were fighting against the Arab genocide against their culture and language. Next to the Berber, we have Phoenician, which they claim came into existence in what is now Syria. However, we have now found stelae with Berber writing on it older than the Phoenician. So it would appear that Phoenician and Greek come from African script. So, and at the end here, you know, this is Phoenician. And then next to that, that's Old Nubian written now with the Greek alphabet. So the Greek alphabet was used to write African languages. It was found easier to teach, and it was a lingua franca and a bigger span of the area that the Cushitic kings were controlling. So these are, you know, just some of the categories that we believe need to be removed from our minds in order that we can really lead the Pan-African awakening and the renaissance of Africa that needs to happen. It needs to, in our minds, begin with the decolonization of our minds and the decolonization of our minds must be the beginning, and the decolonization followed by the decolonization of the African Academy. Thank you. I can't hear you yet, or you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I'm like talking away. No, I was saying, you know, thank you so much for taking the time to do the presentation, because my generation, I feel like we don't take the time or spend the time to learn about the history going back all the way those decades. And you have to really dig deep and really take the time to read books, to be able to research, to understand some of these things, because mainstream media and other resources that are available to us, especially in the diaspora, you know, they don't highlight those things. So it's so important, like, to have someone, you know, like you, an intellectual, to come out and kind of give us a good, at least overview, so that we can also go and do a deeper research and be able to learn that. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're very welcome. I've dedicated my life to uncovering this information for the youth. You are our future. And the African Historical Society is dedicated to arming you with the information and the references and the reference material that you have, so that you can go out with confidence and say, this is why you believe what you believe, and have the references to back it up. If anyone questions you. So we'll be providing free information on Instagram. We'll be providing free information on YouTube, and we will soon have courses for which we will be giving people scholarships to learn ancient African scripts and languages, and contemporary languages as well, and take history courses. And we would, you know, we plan to subsidize that for underserved communities.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much again for joining us. And with that being said, we're kind of going to conclude today's discussion. Thank you everyone for joining us from wherever you are. We really appreciate you, and thank you again for our sponsor, United States of Africa and the Council of Ethiopian Diaspora. We thank you and appreciate you, and I hope that everyone has a lovely weekend. Thank you.
hey.